Well, welcome everybody. So excited to be back here again. Talking to somebody whom I talk to on a very frequent basis. This is my good friend, my close confidant, a person with whom I hold in high regard. And to what name will we be referring to you today? Will you be going by your professional handle?
You can just strictly call me Arjun. That'll be fine. I think we're comfortable enough that that's okay. Yeah.
We know each other. We know each other well enough that we're just going by Arjun.
First name basis. Yeah, we're that comfortable. Yeah,
That's
exactly.
Right. And I'll be going by Mr. Cunningham. Just kidding.
Sorry. I was thinking of another word to start. Okay, never mind. All good.
So welcome to your first time here on the podcast. Who are you when you're at home? This is a podcast where we're looking to learn a little bit about what you do when you're out of the home, just so we get some reference. But we're talking a lot about what it is that you do when you're quote unquote off the clock, how you switch off, how you become sort of the ultimate, and maybe how much that informs who you are and the disparity between the two. So excited to get to know a little bit about you. So for our viewers, Arjun and I actually met each other at work. So I do know a little bit about your work, quote unquote, but I know, and I'll say for the viewers again, neither of us are currently at that role anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
But why don't we start off a little bit hearing about who you are when you're at work, maybe knowing that we're in the transitionary period. Why don't you just tell me a summary about what your work self is?
Sounds good. So my professional life, when I think back, about 18 plus year career now, primarily in sales and marketing leadership roles. So I've been in the telco industry, consumer electronics, but as far as, if I was saying my profession would be, my expertise is around leadership and sales and marketing roles.
Right. Leadership, sales, and marketing. You're that guy who they send in to kind of spruce up their force. You're the one who takes the team.
Yeah, sure. But yeah, I mean, as simply put, I could elaborate. The whole podcast could be about what I've done in my career, but we'll keep it at, if you need to build out a sales force, a sales team, a top performing, high performing culture, and very passionate and engaged, that's usually when I come in. And the latter part of my career has kind of been focusing more from stepping out of strictly the leadership side, which I've definitely grown an expertise in, into more of the marketing side of things. So hyper local and regional marketing, kind of looking into the data and analytics behind how we drive our results, and working collaboratively with a lot of teams from our brand presentation through to advertising and sales at the core.
I'm going to pick up on this here because I do think I know the topic that we're going to bring up here in a sec. And you mentioned this, it's high performing. And I think that's definitely something to note. You were consistently being utilized as high performing. So you were taking people and trying to bring them to the top of their game. And I see this a lot from you, which is trying to get to the top of your game. But obviously your growth into marketing, I think, is about you expanding your skill set so that you're not just top in the sales game, but you're trying to add avenues into that, right?
You got it. I mean, it's one of those funny things, like they go hand in hand, right? Sales and marketing are kind of like, they're different specializations, so to speak, but at the end of the day, you're going for the same result, right? You're working in collaboration with those two teams. So for a lot of my career, it was building the sales force, the leaders, let's call it the, feet on the street, the boots on the floor. Every company calls it differently, but essentially building the teams themselves. And the latter part of my career was more on the behind the scenes, the data, the analytics, like really looking at how we can better approach it from a national perspective, and then bring, a company's national goals down to regional objectives in hyper local markets. So, how a brand comes across with its image across the country versus how it comes across in your small hometown. It can be the same message, but it needs to be uniquely positioned for that community. And that was a lot of my focus in the last few years.
And I wanted to tease that out of you because I think, folks, for those of you that are new to the Arjun experience, this is a person who goes deep. If he gets into something, he goes deep. If he's working, he goes deep. And as you'll hopefully see over the course of the next little while in his hobby, he also tends to take it quite deep. There really is no tap halfway on for you, isn't there?
There, yeah, you know what? I couldn't have said it better myself. And for better or worse, it's sometimes a blessing and can be a curse as well too. So I'll say there's definitely a flip side to it. But yeah, there's 0 to 100, and very often there's nothing in between. So.
Fantastic. So doing this, I know there's some pretty blue chip brands, Best Buy. I know you told me some great stories. Obviously, we work together at one of the leading telcos here in the country, Rogers.
Correct.
But again, unfortunately, this is not a video podcast, because what everybody would be able to see, and what I'm currently basking in the glory of, is you are head to toe, fully dressed in today's topic, which is, yes, the motorcycle experience. And in particular, not just motorcycles. We're not talking about, strapping yourself to your uncle's Yamaha. We're talking about the pinnacle of motorcycling, which is which brand again?
That would be Ducati.
The Ducati.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, or often as we refer to our community, the Ducatistas or the Ducatistas. Yeah, both are accepted.
Excellent. Let me just check my bingo card here. I had Ducatisti within the first 10 minutes, so I've given myself points.
Well, I mean, if we're going to get into it, let's approach it properly. It is a very unique brand. It comes with a lot of let's call it cult-like mentality. And so you're either in or you're out. So there's no halfway.
The Ducatisti. So let's talk a little bit about this. So I know obviously we've talked a little bit about what you do from the weekday, but how often and what is a Ducatisti? Because now that we've said it, we need to talk about what is a Ducatisti.
It's out there. It's in the ether. So it's part of the lifestyle of being a owner and operator of a Ducati. So as far as motorcycling goes, and I'm sure we're going to get into that in depth today in the podcast, but it's very much a community. It's a culture. So the funny thing is, like, everyone has these little jokes of different brands and how they kind of foresee, this is a typical Gixxer rider, and Gixxer, for those not from the community, that's a Suzuki. And then there's like, the Yamaha riders, and then the Ducatis. They're kind of known as the prima donna, as the divas of the riding community. It's a very much a culture of the fashion, the passion behind it. It's more than just you ride a motorcycle. Like you join it, you're all in, you're part of the community, and they've done a fantastic job as a entity to market themselves as it's an emotional purchase, right? You're not just buying bolts and a motor and tires. Like, that's any brand out there. Ducati is all about, you're part of the family. They often advertise it as such too, that when you purchase a Ducati, you don't just buy a motorcycle, you join a family.
So that's interesting. Yeah, because I think, to the uninitiated, a motorcycle is a form of transport, just like any other form of transport. And so you're not just giving yourself another way of getting from point A to point B.
Oh, most certainly. Yeah. I would highly advise that if you're a person that views a motorcycle as a mode of transport, to probably look into another motorcycle brand. Like, you would not be welcome and appreciated in the Ducati community.
Well, let's not put emotions into the Ducati community. I'm sure they're new, and I'm going to ask you a little bit in the future about how you become a Ducatisti, because it does seem to be quite an elite group, and there must be quite a trial process to get from sort of new rider into the elite group that already seems to be.
You know what? We're very welcoming, as much as it may not seem that way from the last few minutes of conversation. But really, at the end of the day, everyone's at a different stage in their Ducati journey, right? So you might be a newcomer to it, not know about the history. People purchase things for various reasons, right? So as you kind of initially join the community, you start to learn these things. If you go to a few bike meets, that starts to expand your horizons. And then in time, I think we eventually get you.
Let's talk about that. So we know up until now, you're pursuing the pinnacle of sales excellence. You're growing, and at some point, when you're starting to realize that you have some additional money, because I know these are obviously, motorbikes are not cheap. So take me through the decision, maybe your first decision, because at some point you never rode a motorcycle, and then I'd like to hear a little bit about how you went from I've never ridden a motorcycle and I'm obviously working to now you're riding a Ducati. What was that journey like for you? What was the first motorbike, maybe?
For sure. So I mean, I'll try to give you, I guess, the Coles Notes version because it's truly a lifetime of experiences that's built to it. But really, of course, it starts as a kid, right? I was a fan of motorcycling in general. I think most people who've ridden a bike, it's the natural evolution. Oftentimes, before you even think of a car, it used to be a thing, at least back in my day, you rode a bicycle, you'd put like little playing cards and you'd tape them to your spokes so it'd kind of make like a exhaust-like flapping sound or like a motor, and you'd ride around and you'd kind of look at guys with a motorcycle. It's like, oh, that's so cool. I want to get a motorcycle when I'm older. And so there was always that passion. I probably rode my first one. I want to say I was probably around 11. I was on an overseas trip with my family to India. A family friend of ours had a motorcycle and he had a really big property. So he was like, hey, if you want to ride it, go ahead. Feel free. And I was like, oh, awesome. This is sweet. So he kind of showed me the ropes of the gears and everything. And I was just barely able to like flat foot it at that time. Thankfully, it was a smaller motorcycle. Instantly was like, oh my God, I can't wait. I want to have a motorcycle. That was actually a Yamaha to begin with. So it's funny, you start your roots with a different brand. And, at the end of the day, all joking aside.
So you were a jinxer to start with.
You really screwed that one up badly. But basically, I was a Gixxer rider when I finally purchased one, but we're getting there. We're kind of jumping the gun. So, essentially, my point being is, you like motorcycling as a culture. And it's the brand part is just, you like a sport and then you pick a team, right? That doesn't mean you hate all the other teams. Of course, once you find your team, you kind of do need to, because that's how it goes. But you're a fan of the sport first, right? So it's the same thing. Motorcycling in general, all joking aside, it's like I have love for anyone on two wheels. That's often what we say at our rides and meetups. And so when I was about, I want to think back here, 19 is when I got my motorcycle license. So of course I had my vehicle license first. I was very much always into car culture and tuning. So I think motorsports was just always in my blood. It's something I've enjoyed. And then, the motorcycle aspect just kind of came through as okay, I really know I want one. The family was always against it. It's kind of perceived as dangerous. So, it was always like, don't get a motorcycle. Even though my dad rode. He rode various motorcycles, not the type that I like. He was more into like cruisers. So he had Bullets, Triumphs, Royal Enfield. Those types of brands were a lot more popular. And so my dad being, of course, Indian descent or from India originally, when he was a child, that's what, he was really into, was like the big British brand motorcycles. Like that was the thing that they all kind of grew up in. That kind of came through as a lot of my parents' cultural influences are of British background. Like they went to Catholic schools growing up, private schools. So it's something that's kind of always influenced our household and our culture.
So your dad was a motorcyclist, which is super interesting. And you said you bought your first motorcycle. How old were you?
I was going to the gym. So the purchase kind of happened on a whim. So essentially, I always knew I wanted one, but it wasn't it had fallen off the radar of priorities. I had my cars, I was going to school, there's various other things happening. And then one of my good friends who just decided to skip the car phase completely, he bought his first bike. Like, I'm the one who should have bought that first. Like, you kind of feel like I brought him to the community, but then he bought one before me. And then I was just like, oh my gosh.
He jumped you. So you were still in your too fast, too furious phase back then, right? He just waved goodbye to you and he went and bought a motorcycle and suddenly you're on chill.
And the one that I would often tell him was like one of my, favorites. A bike for like $13,000 or $14,000 back then would have been the equivalent of like $100,000 plus car.
I just want to pick up a sentence that you said. You bought a bike on the way to the gym?
Yeah. So essentially what happened was, so after he bought this, I was like, oh my gosh, like he's jumped the gun on me. Like this is my thing. And now he's more of a motorcyclist than I am. So I'm like, what the heck? And, it reinvigorated my passion to kind of be like, okay, I got to get a bike. And so then I started looking and I'm like, okay, I'm not going to be that guy who just goes out and gets like the bike I was telling him about, which he just bought, and then kind of be like, oh, well, I copied you. So I'm like, well, another bike I really loved was the Gixxer 750 or the GSXR 750 to the uninitiated. So in the Suzuki community, the GSXR is referred to as a Gixxer. So it's a whole slang, the same way we're saying like, Ducati guys or Ducatisti or Ducatistas. There's a whole community known as Gixxer bras, open to the females as well too. But the most of the memes are around being a Gixxer bra. So it's kind of known as like a crazier community, let's just say. You get a lot of performance for the dollar, which, again, the lower barrier to entry does bring in a wide variety of people, let's just say.
And I'm going to ask again, I just want to make sure you were going to the gym. Were you actually on your way to the gym and you stopped and bought a bike. That's what I'm really interested in.
Correct. And so exactly how it happened is I think this was about 7 to 10 days after my buddy had bought the motorcycle. I was like, okay, first of all, I'm like, I need to go get my license because I'm not even licensed for a motorcycle. But I'm like, that's a thing I'll deal with later. I know I can ride a motorcycle and I'll figure it out. So I was headed to the Fitness World on Kingsway. Those who are from the local community here will know. There was at the time, relatively new dealership. It was a Jim Pattison Suzuki dealership for motorcycles that had opened. And there was a Fitness World essentially right behind it. So I was going to the Fitness World. I saw this dealership. It was open. I was like, you know what? I'm going to pop in. Let me just take a look. Let's see what they have in inventory. I saw the bike that exactly the way I want, black on black. It was a beautiful motorcycle. And I was like, okay, this is the one I want. I started having conversation with the sales guy because there's a bunch of mods that I had in my mind that, okay, I got to change the exhaust. I want a shorter fender. I want a fender eliminator. I want a bunch of these things done on the bike. And I was like, hey, how would it work? If I wanted all these things, and how quickly can you get it done? And he's like, oh, probably with parts on order and this and that, within a month, we could probably do all that for you. So I was like, okay, you know what? That's about all I'll need to get my license. So I was like, you know what?
He's like, do you want to take it for a test drive? And you're like, actually, maybe not today because I physically can't do that.
Exactly. And oftentimes, too, what would happen is with the kind of higher end or the bigger liter capacity sport bikes, they wouldn't even let you test drive even if you were licensed. They typically would just be like, okay, if you're a little bit older, it would be a different story. But back then, it's like, okay, if they can kind of see that you're, a teenager or in your 20s, they're probably not going to let you take a spin on a bike just as a test pilot. So that would have been a whole other conversation, but I didn't even, approach that. I was like, I know it. I like it. I sat on it in the dealership and I'm like, yep, feels good to me. That's the one I want. And so I basically was like, hey, if I were to purchase this, do you guys mind hanging on to this? Would I be able to store it here for a month or two if I needed to? And he's like, no problem. We've got a storage in the back. If you want to buy it, a done deal. Me and my naiveness at the time thinking that was them doing me a favor of purchasing something and they just need to keep it in the back for a little bit. He obliged and I was like, fantastic, done. Bring out the paperwork. Let's do this. So bought my bike, put a down payment down on all the accessories that I needed. The rest was going to be up upon pickup. And I was like, okay, let's get this done.
Was he regretting it a little bit? Was he like, actually, we're not that, did we say we'd store this? Maybe we won't.
No, it was there was no regrets. It was a really great experience, and basically in about 2 weeks, I'd signed up for a motorcycle course. I wanted to do it the right way, so I went to a PRS. For those who don't know, that's Pacific Riding School. I would say the best riding school in the community. So if you're in BC, definitely the place to go. They had a full proper course that you could do. Variety of options. They do a full-time course over a few days. There's one that's I believe is 4 to 6 weeks, but it's a weekend class kind of thing. So various different schedules that they operate on. But I essentially did an evenings and weekend type of class where I would, I believe I used to go in for about an hour or so, 4 or 5 days in the week. And then on the weekend, there would be a longer session, which was 4 or 5 hours where we'd go over and do the skills as well as theory and all that. So yeah, long story short, in about a month, I was licensed, able enough to drive it home at least, because at the time, and I should say ride it home to be specific, we are very particular about that in the community. It's riding, not driving.
I think that's just the English language, but I hear you.
No, but we take it serious. I mean, you get the point when somebody says oh, I drove my bike home. Normally you'd be like, oh, no big deal. You wouldn't really interrupt the conversation. But when you're talking in the motorcycle community, people often do you rode it. You rode it. You didn't drive it home. Yeah.
So that's fantastic. So you're 11 years old. A friend of yours lets you ride a motorbike that you're, again, unlicensed for. And
overseas, everything's okay overseas. Yeah, we're way too strict about things.
That's right. You're right. What happens out of the country, right? And suddenly that starts a passion. That passion ignites your desire to learn and drives you to learn excessively, let's say. And you get to the point where you're telling other people and you're inspiring them so much that they're buying motorbikes ahead of you. And this doubles down your passion to the point where on your way to do another thing, you stop in and make a major purchase, one that you currently aren't licensed for. And now you have a goal. This is something that's been set in front of you. So now you're even twice as motivated. You're seeing yourself, you're studying, and you're again, I think this is a crucial thing for you as a person. So this is not an impediment. This is something you set in front of you. You like to set yourself up these goals.
Yes. Yeah. Most certainly. Sometimes these challengers are just like, it's funny because I don't really see them as challenges. They're just more like, oh, okay, well, this is another thing I got to get done. A lot of things apply the same, right? So in sense of mentality, that's the way I've approached everything at work. Nothing's ever been a challenge or like, oh my gosh, how are we going to do it? It's like, okay, what do we got to do and how do we get it done? And so, yeah, that solution seeking mentality is it kind of overlaps into my personal life as well.
So you're now riding, you're a Gixxer. You become a Gixxer. Are you in the community already at this point? So you've taken your test, you're riding it. Are you starting to show up at meets?
You start going to like meets. There's always like, Facebook groups and clubs that you can look up. BC has a pretty big one called 604 Motorsports. I went to a few of those hangouts and, no offense to the community because, to each their own, but it's a bunch of hooligans for the most part. I went there. I realized really early on that I would probably end up dead if I continued to hang out with this community, just because you get a whole mixed bag, right? So there's great people out there. There's first timers like myself. There's a lot of parking lot shenanigans and people just doing wild stuff. So the Sea to Sky is a popular route. We typically would meet up at a parking lot, make our way up the Sea to Sky and back. But what ends up happening with this group that I notice quite often is just like you get a lot of that hooligan culture where I love spirited riding. You don't get a motorcycle to ride the speed limit. But that said, I also like to.
Although we fully endorse riding the speed limit.
Sure. But, spirited riding, as we say, is like, you got to have a good head on your shoulders. So, you follow the laws, follow the limits and, have a good head on your shoulders of like that. Think of every place you ride as like, that's your community and where you live and you won't run into any problems. Right. And once you're out, out of bounds a little bit, out in an area where you can see kilometers ahead of you, it's nice and clean. You're in a fairly safe environment. And then, you have a little fun. You twist the throttle. Like that's why you buy a motorcycle. Right. So that's the way I've always approached it. And, fast forwarding a bit, that's what I've loved about the Ducati community that I've met. And I think it's a natural consequence of as you get older, a lot of the riders, like, they know when's the time to have fun and when should you kind of like, be reasonable. And that's early on in the Gixxer community days. While I love the bike and I did keep that for 13 years, it's still one of the loves of my life. I very much, we'll always remember that bike and have a passion for Gixxers as well. You just have to be careful. And that's something of a stigma that's associated with motorcycling that I'm really trying to actively remove because, knock on wood now, gosh, I'm like almost about 17 years riding. 17, 18 years riding now, never had an accident, knock on wood. Funny enough, never got a speeding ticket. I mean, really, fingers crossed. I don't know where the horseshoe is on me, but that one is what really surprises me.
I want to ask you again, before we make you complicit in multiple felonies here, we'll say, so obviously there's the motorsport aspect of this. There's the driving and the technical side of this and the exhilaration of it. So let's just call that the sort of the pursuit of excellence, the riding of it. But you've mentioned so many times there are different communities and stuff. I think, especially now as we age, everybody ages, it's hard to find groups of people like-minded that you get to hang out with. There's a lot of talk about how, social groups are harder to come by. So maybe how much do you think the community, like, I guess, are you buying the bike as much for the bike as the community or more in some cases? Like you want to join the community, so you buy the bike, or you think you always love the bike and you accept the community?
My guess would be for most, the bike comes first because you don't really know unless you grew up in a household where there's a motorcycle culture, where it's embraced and shared with you, which oftentimes isn't the case. And I'll say with my own example, right? Like I knew my dad rode motorcycles. I'd seen pictures of him as a kid doing it. With my mom, I'd seen pictures of them on a motorcycle, but it wasn't actively. I think it's like an instant parent mode of once you have a kid, it's like most people don't want to talk about it. It sits in a binder somewhere and it's like, oh, let's act like we never had one. They're super dangerous, don't ride one. Yeah, we did, don't do as we do, and just like that kind of mentality. So
but you had been driving cars and you'd been driving cars fast, but once you decided to drive motorcycles, they were like, no.
It wasn't embraced by any means. It was in fact like don't get a motorcycle, like we're never talking to you again. And that's a whole side quest that we can get into of like when I did actually buy it, it was my gosh, it was an awkward few weeks at home. So it was like a banishment conversation of like, no, you bring one of those, like you forget about it. Like, like let's not even think about it. Like not a good conversation to have and super dangerous. Like, what are you thinking? So yeah, when I did eventually buy one, fun fact. So I came up with this whole elaborate scheme to explain to my parents of like how I won it, and I didn't actually buy it, which was hilarious at the time to me, and years later to my parents as well, because they never bought it for a second. But basically, I told them I went to a motorcycle show, and I bought a ticket there. I created a ticket on my computer of like this GSXR 750 contest with all these like different mods that I knew I was going to do on the bike anyways. And so I'm like, oh, these are all the sponsors of the contest. And then, I did a fake phone call where I had my friend call me at home, so I could be like, oh my gosh, what, I won? Like, this is amazing.
Okay, so let's just recap. So in order to get past your parents' hesitation in you owning a motorcycle, you faked the fact that you won it. This is the path that you would recommend for others to get by this hesitation.
No, I definitely would not. A lot of things I've done in my life I wouldn't recommend to others. Like, it's led me to where I am, but that was my journey. And yeah, so basically my solution was.
So are you in the room with them and then he calls? Like, okay.
Oh yeah. I waited till like it was in the evening that they were at home. My mom was like watching a show in the living room, and I'm like, okay, I've got to make this very obvious. Text my buddy and I'm like, hey, give me a call. I'm ready. Like, we pre-discussed this in advance, and
ring, 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 ring.
He gives me the phone call and I'm like, oh, sorry, what is this? Like, oh, is this from the Abbotsford, like the motorcycle show? Oh yeah, I was there. What? No, get out of here. Did a whole like, oh my gosh, like I'm so excited. This is amazing. I never won anything. Like,
you should probably sell it. You should make you could pay down all those debts that you have. It was
the whole thing. Yeah, it was hilarious. My mom was like, oh, that's awesome. Like, great, I guess.
You didn't buy your incredible story about how you won a motorcycle?
Yeah. So that's basically what happened then. And then after that, I was like, well, I got to get licensed now. Like I guess I got to go figure that whole situation out. And of course, I'd already signed up for the motorcycle lessons. And then, proceeded to do that. And then the day I brought it home too, I recall vividly seeing my dad's reaction. Like, he was out in front of our garage. And then as I was pulling in, he just like basically just shook his head and walked inside because he wasn't buying that this had been a miraculous prize win.
So at some point, I'm assuming this podcast is going to go out live. You've told them this? Yeah.
They're aware. Yeah, we've laughed about it. So essentially what happened was like years later, of course, after I'd brought it to like fast forward, but still give you some notes, like there was a lot of like, there's no way you won this. Like, how did this happen? And like, this looks pretty, modded out. Like, it has all these like things done to it already. Like, they give contest bikes like this. And then of course I held true with my story of like, well, that was the whole point. I'm like, they're all sponsors and like, it's like a done up motorcycle. Like, how lucky am I? Like, this is amazing. Like, so
you doubled down.
I doubled down. I mean, that was the only way to do it. I doubled down for a few years. It was only till like, I think I was in my mid-20s at some point that we laughed about it. And when I was like, they had seen that I turned out okay and I was doing relatively successful in my life at that point. So I was like, hey, like, I mean, I'm sure you guys are aware, but I'm like, I didn't win that bike, right? They're like, yeah, like nobody except you thought that you won that bike. Like, we were all aware. Like,
well, I think it's an excellent way to get a motorcycle, I guess, for those of you the uninitiated. So you have a passion and obviously you're looking to start. I personally, I've never really wanted to ride a motorcycle. So in my own personal life, never before have I ever been like, I wish I could ride a motorcycle. And when I got married, my wife said to me, you can never ride a motorcycle. And it was sort of like this weird conversation because I was like, well, I didn't ask to ride a motorcycle. Like, it was not a scenario. And then suddenly you're like, oh, can I ride a motorcycle? Like,
but now you kind of want to, right?
I don't know why that's the case, isn't it? Like, maybe your parents they should have flipped that around. They should have been like, you know what? You can ride a motorcycle. Yeah, you should have one. Yeah.
You should get one. Do the reverse psychology.
Yeah. Suddenly you're going to like...
Yeah, probably. Who knows? But, it's funny on that topic, like through the years, every riding friend I had, I typically lost them to a girlfriend, an engagement, marriage, or like the kids. right? As soon as the kids are coming, it's like hey, you know what, honey, I love you, but we're having a kid now. It's like people just assume you're going to die is the funny part of like, statistically, it's very low, the amount of people that die riding a motorcycle relative to the other amounts of things that could kill you. But it's perceived often in this way of like, it's just known. It's like, oh, you're getting married? Oh, it's like it kind of comes with the proposal almost of like, oh, well, you got to get rid of that. So I lost most of my riding friends through the years to those life changes.
I don't want to hang this. It wasn't my wife. I mean, I was not going to ride a motorcycle. And then I honestly, you look at the kids and I don't know what it is. Like you think like, oh, I don't want them to not have me around. And so you make all these weird choices. It's weird though.
Of course, yeah, a rightful fear to have. I mean, you want to be there for them, but yeah, it's again also like you're not going out there to die, right? And if you do it safely, like hopefully you return.
Yeah, it's true. And like you say, it's not like it stops you from doing all things. You know what I mean? Like I still like to break dance in the shower. You know what I mean? That's dangerous.
Exactly. That's in my opinion far more dangerous, right?
Yes, but it's a performance. So here you are. You have obviously bought this motor. Well, like I say, bought. You won. Now you have a motorcycle. You've become this passionate motorcyclist. Obviously, your success in your professional life is still allowing you to ride these motorcycles and allowing you. So you've become a jixer, and you've started to realize the community is not the community maybe for you. Is that what led you out of it?
So yes and no. So I mean, I had that bike for like 13 years. So it wasn't like I'm not part of this community. I would just say the was not that much of a interest to me for those first 13 years of riding. So I kind of became more of a solo rider. Like I had my group of friends. So initially when I bought it at the time, I started growing my circle of like, it's a great conversation starter when you see another guy on a bike. You're like, it's kind of like an instant friendship builder of like, hey, do you want to go riding sometime? Oh, sweet. And then you kind of figure out if you have other common, personality traits that align, or if you even have a similar riding style. And that's usually kind of how you grow your group. So at one point I had like 5 or 6, solid riding friends that I would go out with on occasion. But then over the years, like I said, by, I would say my late 20s, I'd lost most of them to typically engagements or weddings, and definitely by kids. It was like see you later. And then essentially I was kind of like, okay, well, I go riding. I myself, got engaged. I got married, divorced now. And that kind of led to the Ducati story as well.
Nothing to do with motorcycles, right? There was okay.
Nothing to do with motorcycling, but it was one of those things of like, for me, it was like a hard, like conversation early in my relationship, even of like, I love motorcycling. Is that going to be a problem? It was definitely not. Like she used to ride with me. I got her gear and everything. So it was like, she was all about it. So, honestly, I used to ride like a few times a year. It was like insured in the summer, take it around. Like, never used to go on very long rides. Being a sport bike, it was just, go up the Sea to Sky, ride for a couple hours, come back home. And then that was kind of like the first stage of my riding life, right? So lost most of my friends by the end of it to the community, like as not lost them, like they're not dead.
We have to find a new way to talk about this because it's so dark. You've said it like 4 times. I keep thinking like...
After I said that, yeah. And right after I said it, like I heard it coming out of my mouth and I'm like, these people haven't passed away. Why did it sound like...
So let's just agree that they've stopped riding.
Yeah, that's the better way to put it. And I got to say, being my first podcast, like you are popping my podcast cherry here. There's things that you say, like once you've said them, you're like, oh, that sounded so weird. So I'm sure we're going to have some of those clippable moments here, but just be selective in what we choose there.
I think popping your podcast cherry maybe should be another one that we put in.
Possibly, right? I mean, we're also trying to keep this entertaining, right? So essentially what happened was, for me, the riding part kind of became more of like you look at the bike in the garage, you clean it, it's enjoyable to sit on sometimes, but you barely ride, is basically where I had gotten to in my riding with the Gixxer. So, the end of the 13-year journey, really, I probably would have never sold that bike, but I was so emotionally connected to, that part of my life. I even had a pre-wedding photo shoot that I did with my ex on it, and I was just kind of like, you know what? I love this bike, but now it's like, it kind of brings so many other memories with it, and like looking to the future. And one day if I'm in another relationship or something, I'm like, do I want anything associated with this, like, now sad period of my life? I'm like, probably not, right? So that's what led me to selling it. It was very emotional. I still know the new owner. I follow her on TikTok and Instagram. We're friends. So it's like, it's helped that it went to a good person, and that I can still see it from afar and be like, okay, well, I know it's out there. It's being looked after. She tracks it. So it's like the bike has a great life. Her name was Ayumi, by the way, the bike, not the person who bought it. And yes, it's a common thing for me to name my bikes.
Oh, sorry. When you say she, you're referring to the bike.
Yes.
Oh, I see. I was like,
my bikes are always female. Just to each their own. Like
in your mind, yeah, in your mind.
So my tradition is I name my bikes according to their origin country to kind of stay authentic to the country. So being Japanese, it's a Gixxer, Ayumi. A names are just a name. I always love names that start with the A. Maybe it's because I'm Arjun, and it's just associated with that. So that was kind of it. She was Ayumi.
Oh, I see. It's also the first letter in the alphabet, and I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, like number one, winners, it all goes together. And then with my Ducati now, which I'll get into later, but her name is Ariana, or I refer to her lovingly as Ari.
Not named after the singer, but after an Italian woman, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, like I do like Ariana Grande too, but like that was not the main purpose. Like it goes hand in hand. There's a lot of similarities in place, which a lot of my friends will joke about, like because my Ducati has this Termignoni exhaust system, and like it just winds out so that it holds notes very long that are just amazing to hear when you're out on a ride. So at times we'll joke, it's like it's like vocal range that Ariana has too is like my exhaust system, but we'll get into that detail later.
I love it. Yeah. I mean, details we can get into is you're now single and you name your bikes after women. So I'm sure there's no Freudian.
That was when I was married as well too. So it's that was from my first bike. So
probably nothing to look into there. So you've obviously now given yourself the license, the ability to go out, and this is of course due your separation. But so now you sold her. And now you're bikeless for how long?
So I was bikeless for about 2.5 years after that.
So you're bikeless, and that was on purpose. You weren't like waiting.
No, it was kind of like honestly, I thought like, okay, I will get another motorcycle at some point, but it wasn't a priority for me. I was going through a lot, like, emotionally, mentally, through the whole divorce thing. And I was like, okay, let me at least get rid of everything that's like associated with that chapter of my life. I sold my vehicle. I changed that. I sold my motorcycle because I was just like, yeah, you want to kind of at least mentally feel like you're making a fresh start. So that was kind of like one of the purposes involved too, of like, okay, I'm going to do something different. And then I was like, okay, at some point I'll get a motorcycle, but it wasn't really top of my radar at this point. I'd kind of not necessarily lost the passion because I still loved motorcycles, but it just wasn't a priority in my life.
So a couple of years go by, you're still at work, you're still doing extremely well. That passion gets renewed. So somebody's riding one. What's because before you made the decision on the way to the gym. So I'm really excited about this decision.
This one was a lot more well thought out. So I started deciding like months in advance that I'm like, okay, I had heard news about this new monster being launched in 2021. And I was like, the type of bike that I have. Yeah. So it's naked or a hyper naked, depending on how you want to categorize it. So with motorcycles, there's different categories. There's like your sport bikes, your touring bikes, adventure bikes. Naked bikes is a community of, they're essentially sport bikes without the fairings. So I've got some images behind me here. Like this is a classic Ducati that we're looking at. And these, I'm sure the viewers here, they're not going to be on video, so they won't be capturing this, but essentially the parts that cover the sides and the front of the bike that you'll see on a sport bike, typically, those are called the fairings. So when a bike doesn't have those, it's called a naked bike. So it's more exposed. Pros and cons, obviously, being a lot easier to work on. These panels don't have to be removed when you want to do an oil change or etc. And then for Ducati, for me, the added advantage was they're typically known as bikes that run really hot. So with the naked bike, I was like, okay, it's going to run cooler because it's more exposed to air. I like the look of the bike as well, too. It was very unique to me. And then I was just kind of like, I started thinking about it ever since it launched, but I was like, okay, I want to get the second year that it's out because anything that's brand new, whether it's a car or motorcycle, the first launch year typically is full of all the gremlins and the issues. The manufacturer's still figuring out what, things that go wrong. So year two is usually a safer bet to get something because they've kind of worked out at least the major issues. I put my deposit down, and yeah, a few months later, picked up my bike.
What a growth pattern. So you went from a guy who's riding it illegally to a guy who's buying it before he has a license on his way to another thing, to making a dedicated path and actually making a purchase and having preset criteria and not forcing the scenario. So did you feel a sense of growth? Did that come across? Did you feel like, actually, I've grown?
I don't think it was like I did anything really bad the first time around. So I mean, I know you'd love to put it that way, but I rode it legally in another country in a backyard, which is legal, by the way. It's not on a public road. I learned how to ride. Then I got properly licensed, which most people don't even do a course. Like, I didn't decide to just go get my license, which I probably could have since I knew how to ride, but I wanted to learn the proper fundamentals from a professional and learn the safe approach, hence, my plug to PRS. And then, very happy with that. 13 years a rider, I was like, okay, I think I'm ready for Ducati. And, it was always one of those things where I feared getting into the brand because I had heard, I knew historically that they're more expensive, like typically double the cost of a comparable bike from a Japanese brand. And at cases even triple depending on the model you're looking for. So I was like, okay, that was a barrier to entry. And then also just the upkeep and maintenance. I'd always heard horror stories about how expensive they are to maintain, and anything Italian, very similar to like exotic cars, right? Lamborghinis, Ferraris. It's not just being able to afford one. It's like, can you maintain it? Like anything luxury. And as a current Range Rover owner, like same concept, right? It's a beautiful vehicle. I love it, but it's like, you got to pay to play, and you got to know that before you buy it, because if you don't plan for that, you're going to hate your ownership experience. They are extremely expensive to take care of. And then, another way I could have approached it too. So there was two bikes I really liked. Of course, everyone thinks of Ducati. They think the Panigale. That's their, creme de la creme, their racing bike that's used in world, superbike championships, MotoGP. So people typically think of that. That's their halo bike. But I also was like, well, I'm older now. My back kind of hurts on longer rides. Those bikes are typically very crouched over, like you're kind of hunched over at all times. And that's similar to like the Gixxer that I had. While it was still a relatively comfortable sport bike, I was like, okay, I'm getting older now. I want to do more longer riding. It's not about just posing at Starbucks and being, locally around town, which oftentimes is that's the reason you buy a sport bike. Let's be honest. And then what ends up happening is I was like, okay, I want to actually go on longer rides. And I wanted the approach of like, let me get a bike that's more, reasonable power band, something I can really use the engine and hone my skills on again. And now 3 years into riding that, almost 2.5 years, I want to say, I'm loving motorcycling again. And I'm like, okay, you know what? I'm going to keep this, but I think down the road, maybe I'll get a Panigale too, just as like a fun weekend or a track bike. But as all in all, I couldn't be happier with the purchase on my Monster. Like, I've ridden it over 21,000 kilometers in 2.5 years. And to put it in context, my last bike, which I owned for 13 years, I had just under 10,000 kilometers on. So not even comparable how much riding I've done.
What was your best trip? Why was it your best trip? Where did you go? What made it kind of like feels like a once in a lifetime experience? Because it's never going to happen. We know I'm not getting a motorbike. We've talked about it. I've got kids and a wife, and that's probably not going to happen. So take me through it.
Never say never, but we can assume that's probably not going to happen, but there's always a chance, in the famous words of Jim Carrey.
I think the famous words of Jim Carrey is, so you're telling me there's a chance, but I'm not here to correct you.
Exactly. We're close enough. You picked up on the reference, right? Which is like the beauty of our relationship. So you always know where I'm going. I feel like I like to just dangle it just close enough that like you can correct me, because I know you love correcting me. So.
Oh, you're doing it for my benefit. Thanks.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about the perfect trip, the best trip, or maybe I'm building it up too much.
It would be a real toss-up for me between the best trip being this annual rally that I do called the Ducati Rally. So I'm part of this this group, which is the Ducati Users Club of Western Canada, or DUCWC as we refer to ourselves. It's a trip we do out to Nelson, BC. So it's about roughly a 700 kilometer trip out there. And then every day of the rally, we'll do little rides around town. So like anywhere from like 3 to 4 hour kind of, rips around the region. So it all in all ends up being about like a 3,000 kilometer trip and over 5 days. which is absolutely amazing. It's the trip itself that's enjoyable, of course. Like heading down, usually, we'll break it down over either as a single day ride down or 2 nights. And then once you get there, we've got users from British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, even some coming down from the States. And yeah, it's about 50 to 60 people this year. And then previous years, it's been like 75, 80 people. I think that the real enjoyment is that kind of camaraderie of like getting all the bikes together. They're all passionate enthusiasts behind the Ducati brand. And just, it's like being amongst your people, so to speak, right? Like they appreciate your bike, the nuances of it. Like for an enthusiast to an enthusiast, it's like a different spark in their eyes that lights up when they see the bike, right? It's not the same thing as versus when you're speaking to somebody who's passionate about it. It's like, oh, I see you did these modifications and you've got this blinged out, and it's like it brings joy to you, right? The reason you do these things is obviously it's for yourself, but like it brings a lot of joy when somebody else recognizes the effort you put in and like all the little intricacies of it. I think that's something that really adds to the whole experience.
So you start all as a group? Like, do you meet all in one location or?
Separately. So it's people, basically the rally is 5 days. The actual itinerary kind of starts at the end of day one. So it's like meetup registration. And then like the next few days is where we have organized rides. But how we kind of do it is like you come up with your friends, obviously, or like your group that you might have. You might come up solo. It's like totally up to you, obviously.
How did you travel up in a group?
So there's 4 of us that go up every year. So this was my 3rd year in a row that I went just recently, a couple weeks ago. And so, yeah, it's the 4 of us. The first year I went, I just went into a forum when I first got to Ducati. I was like, hey guys, like I'm headed down from Vancouver. I planned to go by myself anyways, but I'm like, anybody else headed down this day? Like, you guys want to ride together? I made friends with a couple of buddies from the local club, and then we went down together.
And the ride itself, is it a particular, why choose Nelson out of all the places? Is it because of the ride to get there? Or?
Yeah, so it's a combination thing. So this rally, historically speaking, it's been going on for, I believe about 15 years. But the last 10 of them, they've been going to Nelson, to my understanding. And it's just been because of the roads. They actually moved it there because it was a great combination. Like we do it over Canada Day long weekend. So people tend to already have the long weekend anyways. They can just kind of add an extra holiday to make it a 5-day event kind of thing. And then Nelson specifically, it's a hidden gem, absolutely beautiful. I stayed at the Ainsworth Hot Spring this last time, and it's just it's a beautiful place, very calm and serene. The landscape is amazing. And then from a rider's perspective, it's like the roads are riding heaven. So terminology we use in the riding community is like twisties and sweepers. So there are different types of roads. So twisties being like quick switchbacks. So when the road shifts from like back to back, like going through a kind of canyon carving would be like twisties. And then sweepers are really long, slow curves where like you can do a lot of speed in the turn itself, because it's a very slow curve versus twisties just being switchbacks. So both are very enjoyable, but those are things riders look for. Like straight pavement is like you're looking for curves. That's what most motorcyclists enjoy, and especially sport bike riders or sport tourer riders, I should say.
So the 4 of you, a lot of twisties, a lot of sweepers. This is a 1-day journey to get there, right? It's all in 1 day.
Yeah, so we did it this year. Yeah, just time constraint wise, like I didn't want it. I've done it last year as a 2-day where we do a pit stop in Kelowna. So that's about the halfway point. Spend a night there, head out the next day, do another half day. But it's doable in one. It's about roughly a 8 to 9 hour riding day. And then obviously we take stops like about every 200 kilometers. You're going to need gas. So we're stopping to do a quick pit stop. And that's about the perfect time because you start to kind of like your legs need a little bit of a stretch. So usually on like the trip down, it would be like a couple of gas stops and like obviously you're stopping for breakfast or lunch. So those kind of just line up perfectly for giving you a fun riding day. It's a long day, obviously, when you do it in one, but then we end it with like, the resort we're staying at has a nice hot spring and a cold plunge. So it's just the perfect end to the day.
So you love it because it's an incredible ride to get there. There's this, I guess, a sense of camaraderie now because you've now done it.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, you make friends. It's funny. Like, I mean, this is something I think I alluded to a bit earlier, but, the camaraderie of the riding community, it's like, it's an instantaneous friendship. And you meet people that I would say are friends now of mine, regardless. I won't even call them just riding friends. Like, we hang out and then, they're great people. That's just like any community, any club, right? You have a common hobby that you're very passionate about. That doesn't mean you instantly connect with them on everything else that, they might enjoy or not, or how they think and, XYZ. The list could go on about all the things that make up a person's personality. But yeah, it's just, you can actually have, like, there's riding friends that I have that I'll meet at this, which we don't talk all year outside of just going for rides, right? We have our little WhatsApp groups or our Facebook group for when we want to go on a ride, and they're lovely people that I love riding with. But yeah, there are some in there where I'm just like, okay, like, like anything beyond riding conversation or motorcycles, I'm like, okay, that's probably, I don't see ourselves hanging out that often outside of riding, but it's a very niche thing, right? And then on the flip side, like I said, yeah, there's definitely friends that I think will be friends for life that we've met through the community.
What makes a great ride?
For me, and this is going to be different for everybody, right? It's like taking a great trip or a great vacation. It's never the destination, it's the journey, right? It's the people you go with. The right friend group, the right people that you're with, they make any trip amazing. You could have the most boring destination, but it's with a funny group of people. You have laughs along the way. It's the conversations you have at the pit stops and things like that. That definitely is a huge aspect to any great trip, especially the longer rides. And then other aspects that make a great trip are obviously the roads themselves. So as I mentioned, I know you love to laugh, so I'll bring them up again, but the twisties and the sweepers, right? These are a very common motorcycle terminology in any motorcycle community outside of Ducati as well. So they're just things we look for. So great roads, open air, the more you can be outside of communities, the better. Just because, like, as I had mentioned earlier, right, you ride a motorcycle to ride it spirited. While you're always cautious of your surroundings, like, it's just easier to have a bit more fun once you're like out in the open, right? And there's no residents around, there's no highway exits, etc. You can see for the next 5 or 10 kilometers ahead. That's where you really have a lot of fun with the bikes. So I think that definitely adds to it. And then, yeah, generally it's just, kind of what I mentioned, like great company, good people, great roads.
I feel like that may be an order of priority for you too. Like, definitely there's a sense of people from you as a person. But yeah, I see this from this, like, it's not about you on your own exploring roads. And maybe I'll pause and just, for you were mentioning the twisties and the sweepers, for the reason why I as an individual enjoy it is because the first time I heard it, it was without context. And so it was just the story where you started chatting about twisties, and that actually made me interested in motorbikes because I thought that's an interesting term. So yeah, I'll listen all day.
A thought that came to mind just as you were saying this too, like other reasons that, you enjoy a trip, like obviously like the road itself, the whole experience. But it's just, like as a whole, I think it's the thrill, right? Like the thrill you get from this trip of like being out there with your friends, you're all like kind of riding in sync, and like with the groups, right? Especially where like the 4 of us going up, we kind of have a rhythm, we have an understanding with each other. I think that's the key part of like what makes a great trip is like, you start to understand the people you like riding with more because they have a similar riding style, right? So we always say, like, when you go to a new group ride, when you don't know the people, it's like ride your own ride. That's something everyone says in motorcycle forums is like, don't try to keep up with people that are too fast for you. Don't do anything crazy. It's safety first is kind of something that a lot of the motorcycle groups do preach, because you don't want to ever ride beyond your capability to try to keep up with people and get into a dangerous situation, right? But on the flip side of that, something that you kind of do as far as like filtering out who you like riding with is like, it's if they have a similar skill set or a capability, it's a more enjoyable ride. You're lagging around less. You're kind of riding at the same pace. And I would imagine it would be quite similar to like, I don't know if it's like that in cycling or in other things, but it's like if you're playing a sport, right? Like it reminds you of playing ping pong or badminton. If you're serving out to somebody and they never are able to serve back, it's a pretty boring game. And you kind of eventually be like, all right, like, I'll tinker around, but this isn't fun. You generally enjoy playing a sport when there's a bit of competitiveness and the people can kind of keep up with you.
What is it that attracts you to this pursuit? Let's call all of driving fast cars or fast motorbikes or the pinnacle of those machinery. What do you think attracts you about about that industry as maybe opposed to, you know, not to go too far to one side, but you're not gardening. Do you know what I mean? Like,
I think it's honestly like most things, it's an emotional experience, right? It's why anybody follows any particular hobby. I think it's special to them, right? So while I like how eloquent you put it as like the pursuit of excellence and whatnot, like from a young age, they light me up, right? Like to this day, if I'm driving around and I see a really beautiful machine, like a nice Lamborghini or a Ferrari comes by, I will like gasp while I'm driving. I'm like, oh my gosh, like that's like a 2017 this and that, like and read out the spec to if there's somebody in the car with me and they're like, what happened? Like, oh my gosh. I was like, did you not see that? Like, that was beautiful.
and it's the pinnacle because I mean you're not doing that for like a Chevy Cavalier. Like there's a classification. Yeah.
Of course, like, I mean, hypercars, exotic cars, I think are just things that like poster vehicles that you grew up with are definitely, attractive like that. But I like, honestly, as a car person, like it brings joy to you and it's tied with your upbringing, your childhood and specific memories of at that time. Like maybe there was a vehicle you idolized when you were a kid and now you see it around on the street and you'd be like, oh my gosh, like, look, like that was so funny back in the day. That was like my dream car or something. Yeah, you'll just see stuff like that. And it's the same with motorcycling. Like, it just brings up a really fun emotion. Any motorcycle, like just being on two wheels, like if I think it's such a relatable experience because almost everyone's ridden a bicycle and it's whatever the experience you get of riding a bicycle times it on 100, right? Or let's say on steroids. So it's the motorcycle is it's a faster experience. You're getting more exhilaration. The wind's in your skin and your hair, whatever you want to call it. Like it brings out emotions in you that you can't describe.
What do you think of the term adrenaline junkie? Do you think that's a real thing? Do you ever identify with that? Or is that just like a dismissive term?
I would say to an extent, I'm an adrenaline junkie, but with safety still in mind, right? Like my riding style every day is like when I go out, it's a joke I'll say with the people in the community is like, I want to go out, have a great time, and then like live to tell the story. Like when I'm on a spirited ride, I'm in full gear. I'm making sure I'm fully protected. I'm using all the safety precautions possible. And like knock on wood, right? Like 16 plus years riding now, never had an accident. You ever see those YouTube videos where like there's people who are like free scaling buildings without any kind of safety measures or whatnot? That to me is like, oh my God, that's an adrenaline junkie. Like those people are nuts, right? So I don't actually think of myself as one, but like come to think of it, like for someone who maybe doesn't ride a motorcycle and they're terrified of it, yeah, I guess I do, relate with being a bit of an adrenaline junkie.
I think there's something interesting that you mentioned about this sport and probably quite a few that drag your focus and command it. And that is an attractive thing when you are dealing with particularly challenging situations because it's hard to separate yourself out. But if you're traveling at excess speed limit, miles per hour, kilometers per hour, you are going to naturally focus. And so I could see that being an attractive thing. And I was just interested, and especially an adrenaline junkie, because the way I think people think about it is, are you addicted to it? Is it something that you're cognizant of that you're like, I'm an adrenaline junkie, but I'm able to like turn it off? Or like you mentioned, there are people that kind of like are always questing for that next thing, like the next speed.
It can be an addiction. It's definitely adrenaline seeking and, as an adrenaline junkie, you could say, but it's about how you approach it. And I guess I've just been fortunate like that in my life where I know things that I enjoy, but I know when to like kind of be like, okay, well, I've had enough of that. And this is where I should stop to be safe now. And I often I'll do the same.
We talked a little bit about this before, but definitely there's a progression of sort of, the impulse purchase for your first bike and then moving through maybe more of a calculated purchase for your second bike. Do you have a plan? What's the future hold for motorcycling? Is it still like, do you plan to do this forever? Do you plan to make new purchases to supplement or enhance? So
you just hit another topic thread here. So I think
tell me the future for Arjun, maybe, and give me the time scale
from a motorcycling perspective. And I think I kind of will bundle this often with like as a car enthusiast too, because I'm both. But you're never not looking for your next purchase. ideally I'd have 5 or 6 bikes, right? So there's my bike, which I love. I would definitely have like a full track sport bike. I'd have a cruiser for the highway kind of long road trips. I'd have an adventure bike for if I wanted to, a mix of trail riding and street riding. So I'm constantly like working through different specifications. I've got like builds saved on my computer of like, oh, this is what I'll do if I won the lotto tomorrow. Let's just say I wouldn't be like worried about what to do with the money. It's all planned out.
So okay, so you won the lotto. So lots of new bikes to keep you interested.
Oh, 100%. I mean, the purchases, I think, of things will probably come later. Like initially, I love travel. I'm a travel junkie. So, first and foremost, my plan would be I'd probably just be on a vacation for the next year or so, let things kind of calm down, build my dream home with an extra large garage, with, of course, like tons of space for bikes and cars. And yeah, and they're all like, they all bring their own type of riding and their own experience, and they're all unique, right? So it's like having kids. Like you can love all of them. It's hard to pick one. You might have a favorite, but obviously you're not going to tell them specifically. But they all bring you joy in different ways.
Thank you so much for answering, because I think, like all of these hobbies, all of these pursuits are not just sort of things that you do, when you can, but I think a lot of people do them because they have to. They need the pursuit of something over and above and beyond.
It's a topic that we kind of lost our train of thought on earlier, but like you were speaking about the motorcycle community and like how, we're in a world these days where it's harder and harder for people to meet in person. I'm a big fan of like, I'm definitely, I think I was born 30 years too late as far as my mentality goes with a lot of things, because while I think it's great of the progress we're making in the world and things are improving as a whole, I think we've really lost touch with a vital part of being a human, which is face-to-face contact, a social circle that you meet, you share your feelings with, your good times, your bad times. Social media is fantastic, and it's almost ironic to me at times that I'm trying to kind of put content out here. But I used to think for the longest time, I'm like, do I want to be a part of this community that I kind of don't like what they're doing to the world? Like I'm not a fan of a lot of the influencers I see out there. I'm like, they're not sending the right message. It's all about just living this fake life out there. Nobody really shares the realities or the sorrows of life, which are very natural and normal. And so that's what actually kind of led me to be like, no, you know what? That's why I need to be out here, explaining the other side of like, everything isn't all roses. Our lives have ups and downs, which are very normal. And most importantly, we need to get out there and meet with people. And I know everybody has a different personality. There's introverts, extroverts, but regardless, I think having a social circle that you can engage with, that you enjoy, it's really important for our mental health, and just to kind of keep us part of this community, right? And motorcycling, I think, is a great gateway to friendships and meeting people. And every person I know who's new to motorcycling, the first comment I hear from them within a few years is like, this was the best decision I ever made. I've not met more friendly people in my life. And of course, it's a great excuse to get out, meet somewhere, go for a ride together, have a coffee, have lunch, have dinner, and you grow your social circle. I've made friends that I'm sure I'm going to keep the rest of my life just in the last few years that I've met in motorcycling with the Ducati community. And I would recommend it to anybody as a great way to kind of start small. It's not a big investment. You don't need to start with a Ducati. You can get into motorcycling for probably about $10K all in for a reasonably small motorcycle, $4,000 or $5,000 worth of gear. And that's gear that's going to last you for years. So think of it as a long-term investment. And once you get in, it's just, if the you get bit by the passion, it's just going to keep growing, and you'll be a part of the community.
Thank you so much, Arjun, for giving me your whole viewpoint on this. It's fantastic.
Hey, oh, my pleasure, and thanks for coping. I know I can be a lot when it comes to the energy level, and it's like when I'm riding, right? It's very difficult to go the speed limit.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. Tips by AT, my good friend, Mr. Arjun Tyagi. Thank you so much again for being a guest today. Again, visually incredible image. That'll be the thumbnail that I think we want to capture for this. Thank you.